Hi, I'm Emily from the Blue Mouse, and today I'm going to teach you how to knit this free cowl that I've called the Cascades cowl pattern. It is a simple cowl that's easy enough for beginners. It's a very simple cowl that takes a knit 2 purl 2 rib and adds a slight bit of eyelet detail to make it more interesting to knit and more beautiful to look at. This cowl is a pretty easy and fast knit because it uses worsted weight yarn, and if you're unfamiliar with that, when you go to like a big box store like a Joann's, it will sometimes say medium or number 4. It's the exact same size, and there are instructions in this pattern to knit it in 2 different lengths. For length A, you will need 165 yards, 151 meters. For length B, you will need 225 yards, 206 meters. And the sample uses Yarn B Soft and Sleek, which is a 100% low pill acrylic yarn that has 232 yards and 142 grams per ball of yarn. The long sample is in the colorway Brownie, and the short sample is in the colorway Spice. If you're using the exact same yarn as me, you'll definitely want to make sure that you match gauge, because for length B, you're cutting it pretty close to the full skein of yarn, so you might even have to undo your gauge swatch in order to finish the cowl. I found some alternate suggestion yarns if you aren't able to get a hold of this yarn or you want to try something different in your stash. In order to have a substitution yarn, you want to make sure that you find something that has similar yardage per amount of grams. For this yarn, it's 232 yards, 142 grams, which having a skein come out to 142 grams is a little bit weird, but that works out to be about 163 yards per 100 grams or 327 yards per 200 grams. So you want something that will give you around that yardage per gram. You can always mess around with any yarn that you have and do a gauge swatch, and you'll likely be able to match gauge with another yarn and maybe another needle size. But these are the somewhat similar yarns that I found. There were very few that were spot on. A lot of them were within 20 or 30 yards of the sample. I always have to put a disclaimer here that I have not tried any of these other yarns for this pattern. I only tried the Yarn Bee, so I cannot guarantee that these will work for you. You'll just have to swatch and maybe play around with needle size to see if it fits. But I just wanted to give you some potential alternatives that might work for you based on the most popular yarn selling companies that I could find. So when it comes to needle size, you will need a set of US 8 5mm circular needle set, and you want it to be either 16 inches long or 24 inches long, 40 centimeters or 60 centimeters, or any size needle that will get you to match gauge. And I suggest not going any larger than 24-inch 60 centimeters around. In terms of other materials, you will need a yarn needle and a stitch marker. And when it comes to gauge, you're going to work this gauge swatch in open work rib stitch, and you want to work it in the round. This is very important because your row gauge especially can change from working flat to working in the round. If you don't know the difference, you can watch my tips and tricks video on that here, which I will show you how to work a gauge swatch in the round and why it's important. So the open work rib stitch worked in the round comes to 18 stitches and 25 rounds equals 4 inches or 10 centimeters. And the open work rib stitch is rounds 1 through 5 are a repeat of a knit 2 followed by a purl 2. And round 6 is a repeat of a yarn over SKP purl 2. Now that might sound really complicated, but I'll show you how to do that. And when it comes to sizing, the circumference of both lengths is going to be 25 3/4 inch, 65.5 centimeters around. Length A, which is the shorter version, is 8.5 inches tall, 21.5 centimeters tall. Length B, which is longer, is 12.25 inches, 31 centimeters tall. And when I'm showing you the pattern, the instructions will be written for length A first, and then in parentheses, it will be length B. So when I say, for example, work 10 parentheses 14 repeats, 10 would be for length A and 14 would be for length B. The cast on amount is the same because the circumference of the cowl is the same for both lengths. There are timestamps in the description below, and you can also skim the timeline of the video to skip to a certain position. If you'd like a printable version of this pattern, you can find the PDF for it in my shop for just $1 because it's a pretty simple pattern, but everything you need to know for this pattern can be found in this video. So if you want it for free, you can follow along and screenshot or write down what you need to do. I hope you guys enjoy this pattern as much as I do, and let's get into it. To begin this pattern, you will need to cast on 117 stitches. We will be doing an invisible join in the round, which will decrease 1 stitch. So after you join in the round, you're going to have 116 stitches. So if you're going to follow me, go ahead and cast on 117. If you're going to join in the round your own way, make sure you have 116 stitches. So I will show you how to work that invisible join in the round here. So you'll want to make sure that when you're casting on and you're ready to join in the round, that your work is not twisted, because when you join in the round, if it's twisted, it'll mess it all up. So what I like to do is I lay it down flat and I have the cast on edge on the inside here as I'm showing you, and you want to make sure that your working yarn is connected to your right side needle and you have all the cast on edge kind of lined up facing the same direction so nothing is twisted. So now you can go ahead and grab your stitch marker and you're ready to join in the round. So again, you want to have your working yarn connected to your right hand needle, and what you're going to do is you're going to take your right hand needle and go into the first stitch on your left hand needle from right to left with your yarn in the back. So kind of like you were going to purl, but have your yarn in the back of your work. So go into it from right to left and just slip it from one needle to the next. Okay, and now you're going to take your left hand needle and you're going to go into the second stitch on your right hand needle, the one that your working yarn is attached to, and you're going to go into it from left to right into the front loop, and you're going to pull it over that slip stitch and off your right hand needle. And you might want to take your index finger and hold on to that slip stitch so it doesn't slide off your needle. Go ahead and take that second stitch and pull it over the needle and off, and don't worry, it'll look really loose and wonky like this. That's totally normal. Just go ahead and pull on both tails of yarn, your working yarn and your tail yarn. Now go ahead and place your marker on your right hand needle and you're ready to knit in the round. After this, you should have 116 stitches left. So this pattern is really simple. It's a 6-row repeat, but rows 1 through 5 are worked all the same. So you're going to start out by working a repeat of a knit 2 followed by a purl 2. And you're just going to work that all the way around. So you're just going to go into the front loop of the first stitch from front to back so that your stitches kind of crisscross like that for your knit stitch. Yarn over from front to back, pull through and slide off. Go ahead and do that again into the front loop from front to back so that you create an X with your needles. Yarn over from front to back, pull through, slide off. And you can go ahead and bring your yarn in between your needles to the front of your work for your purl 2. So go into the front loop of the next stitch from right to left, yarn over, pull it through and slide off. Go ahead and repeat that. So into the front loop from right to left, yarn over, pull through, slide off. Bring your yarn in between your needles to the back of your work, and that's it. You're just going to repeat the knit 2 followed by a purl 2 all the way around. And rounds 1 through 5 are going to be exactly the same. So for round 2, 3, 4, and 5, go ahead and work a knit 2 followed by a purl 2 all the way around. And I will meet you back here for round 6. For round 6, you're going to work a repeat of a yarn over followed by an SKP and a purl 2. And an SKP is a slip, knit, pass. And I'll show you how to do that. So with your yarn at the back of your work, you're going to do a yarn over. So you're going to bring the yarn in front of your right hand needle around to the back. And now I like to hold on to it with my right index finger so that it doesn't slide off. And then you're going to work an SKP, which is a slip, knit, pass. Your yarn should still be at the back of your work, and you're just going to go into the front loop of the next stitch as if to knit it, right? Crisscross your needles and then just move your right hand needle up so that you slip it from your left needle to your right needle. And your yarn should still be in the back of your work. And you're going to knit the next stitch. So go into the front loop of the next stitch from front to back like you would normally. Yarn over, pull through, slide off. And now it's time for the P part of the SKP, which is you're going to pass the slip stitch over that knit stitch and off. So the second stitch on your right hand needle was the stitch that you slipped. So you're going to go into the front loop of it from left to right, pull it over that stitch you just knit and off. Very similar to how we joined in the round. And it should look something like that. And you've just decreased 1 stitch. Here's how it should look from front to back. You should definitely have a yarn over in front of it. So now we have to work a purl 2. Bring your yarn in between your needles to the front, go into the front loop of the next stitch from right to left, yarn over, pull through, slide off, and again into the front loop from right to left, yarn over, pull through, slide off. And you can bring your yarn in between your needles to the back and you're going to repeat that. So work a yarn over followed by an SKP, purl 2. So I'll show that repeat to you one more time. So you're going to yarn over on the right needle. So take your yarn and bring it from front to back around your right hand needle. And you can hold it in place with your right index finger. And now you're going to work an SKP, so a slip, knit, pass. So you need to slip the next stitch as if to knit. So go into the front loop from front to back. Crisscross your needles as if you're going to knit a stitch, but you're just going to lift your right hand needle up so that you slip the stitch from your left hand needle to your right hand needle. So then go into the next stitch and knit it. So go into the front loop from front to back and knit that stitch. So now you're going to do the P part of the SKP and pass the slip stitch over the knit stitch and off. So you're going to go into the front loop of it from left to right. It's helpful to place a finger on the knit stitch to keep it from sliding off as well. Pull it up a little bit and pull it over that knit stitch and off. And it should look like this. So even though you decrease a stitch with an SKP because you yarn over, your stitch count will balance out. So to finish the repeat, you're going to bring your yarn in between your needles and purl 2. So go into the front loop of the next stitch from right to left, yarn over, pull through, slide off, and repeat. And then bring your yarn in between your needles to the back of your work. And that's it. You're just going to repeat rounds 1 through 6. For the short version, you're going to repeat them an additional 7 times for a total of 42 additional rows. And for the long version, you're going to repeat them an additional 11 times for a total of 66 additional rows. And I keep emphasizing additional because when you work 7 more repeats or 11 more repeats, you're not including the first set that you did. And then when it comes to finishing the cowl, you're going to repeat rounds 1 through 5 one more time. So if you lose track of where you are in your cowl, I'll show you quickly how to count your rows so that you can find your place. So this stitch here that I have my yarn needle in is our SKP, or our decrease, because you can see below it there are 2 stitches that kind of join together, and the one that my needle is in is the new stitch that was created out of that decrease. So that was a round 6 repeat. You can base everything off of that, so all the rows above it you can just count as a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the stitch that my needle is in is our round 6, okay? It's a good starting place to find that. There are 2 bars here that make up a V, and that is 1 knit row. So we want to count what's above it. If this is our round 6, then the next one above it is a round 1 repeat, and then a round 2, round 3, round 4, and then we have to count what's on our needles, which is a round 5, okay? So whatever stitch is already on your needles is a round, okay? You have to count that as a round. A round is just a row that's worked in a circle. So since we have 5 rows or rounds above our decrease, we know that we have worked 5 rounds after our last row 6. So our next row would be a round 6 repeat. Okay, does that make sense? So let's say that we haven't done 5, and I'll just block these off here. Let's say that we've done our decrease row here, which is a round 6 repeat. The one above it is a round 1 repeat. The one above that is a round 2 repeat. And let's pretend this one above here is sitting on our knitting needle. So we would count that as a round 3. So since there's 3 above our last decrease, including the one on our needle, we know that our next repeat would be a round 4, okay? And then you're ready to bind off. I chose to do a bind off in pattern. So knit my knit and purl my purls. If that doesn't make sense to you, I will show you how to do that here. So you can remove your stitch marker or keep it on till the end, whatever is easiest for you. I like to take mine off because I find it to be less distracting. So again, like I said, I'm going to work in pattern, so that would be a knit 2, purl 2. So with the standard bind off, you work 2 stitches and pull the second stitch over the first and off your needle. Since my first 2 stitches are knit stitches, as you can see by the column of V's versus the column of bumps, which are purl columns, we're going to go into the next stitch, knit it. So go into the front loop, yarn over, pull through, slide off. Do that again so that you have 2 knit stitches on your right hand needle. So you're going to take the second stitch right here on your right hand needle, and you're going to pull it over the first stitch on your right hand needle and off the right needle, okay? This is exactly the same as what we did when we did the SKP. So go into that second stitch, into the front loop of the second stitch, from left to right. Hold on to that first stitch on your right hand needle. Pull that stitch over the first one and off, okay? And now, because our next stitch is a purl stitch, as you can see by the purl bumps below it, it doesn't have V's, it has purl bumps. So that means it's a purl stitch, okay? So bring your yarn in between your needles to the front, go into the front loop of the next stitch from right to left, yarn over, pull through, slide off, and then we're going to do that passing over motion again. So go into the second stitch here with your left needle from left to right into the front loop, hold on to that first stitch, and pull that second stitch over and off. Now my next stitch again is a purl stitch because you can see the purl bumps below it, and hopefully you can kind of see the difference between the knit 2 and the purl 2. So with our yarn in the front of our work, we go into the first stitch from right to left, yarn over, pull through, and slide off. And again, we do that passing motion. So go into the second stitch from left to right, pull over and off. So you're going to do that all the way around. Every couple stitches, you're going to alternate knits and purls for whatever the stitch would have been. Now there's something to be said for tension here. You want it to have a little bit of bounce. You can see mine stretches here, but it's not super bouncy, okay? You don't want it to be too tight to where there's no bounce here. If it's tight like this, that's bad. Okay, I have a video on how to undo a bind off if yours is that, but the goal is to prevent it from being like that from the beginning. So you want it to have a little bit of bounce to it, but you don't want it to be too loose. Okay, if it's too loose, it'll kind of pucker and maybe even roll over on itself, which would be bad. So you want a little bit of a bounce, but I kind of keep the tension the same all the way around as if I was knitting. You might find that you need to pull a little bit tight on the stitch that you just bound off. So the working yarn, I kind of keep it a little bit tense as I'm binding off so that it's not too loose. But again, you always want to check every few stitches or so that you still have a bounce in your bind off. So I'm binding off here, and I keep it a little bit of a tight tension as I'm doing it, tighter than I would be if I was knitting, because I was noticing it was a little bit too loose as I was doing it on the first half of my cowl. So you just want to keep an eye on it. If it's too loose, you can go ahead and kind of pull a little bit tighter on the working yarn. Everyone's tension is different, so you'll just have to keep an eye on how yours is looking. So here's how mine looks so far. It looks a little bit rippled, but I can still kind of stretch it out to match the tension of my rib. So if I pull my rib out, the bind off pulls with it, but it's not too puckered, okay? It has some bounce to it, but it's not rolling over on itself, which is a good sign. So you just want to keep an eye on it and make sure that it's stretchy enough that you can fit it over your head and that it stretches with the rib, but not too stretchy that it's going to start rolling over on itself. And you might notice that there's a little bit of a gap here in your bind off, and I'm going to show you how to fix that. Go ahead and cut your tail with a length long enough to weave in your ends, and then you can just take your right hand needle and pull that stitch all the way out. Don't worry, it's not going to unravel. So if you'll notice between where your tail yarn is attached and the beginning of that knit column next to it, there's a bit of a dip and a gap, and we want to get rid of that. It's more noticeable from the back side of your work here. This part's not necessary, but I find it just gives a much neater finish to your project. So basically what we're going to be doing is creating a fake stitch that joins the beginning of your bind off to the end of your bind off so that you can kind of bridge that gap and make it look really neat. So if you look at the top of your bind off here, you can see that it looks like knit stitches. They're just sideways. So if you tilt your head a little bit, you can see the V's. Okay, there's a left side and a right side, a left leg or a right leg, and I can take my yarn needle and kind of show you each one. It's a little bit tricky once you get to the first one you bound off because one of the legs actually belongs to your knit stitch and just kind of got pulled up a little bit. So what I like to do is go in a few stitches and find each bind off stitch. So there's one, and this is confusing because this one looks like it has 3 legs to it. Okay, instead of just looking like a V, it has 2 right legs. So the one closest to my right side, this one right here, that's not it. That is actually the right leg to your knit stitch, because if you pull on it and you look down, it's connected to that stitch here. It's the right leg of that one. It just kind of got pulled up in the bind off process. That's not the one you want. The one you want is above it, okay? So instead of having 3 legs at the bottom, you just find the correct one here. If you put it in the knit stitch, it's not really going to matter that much. It'll still look a lot neater, but hopefully that makes it a little bit clearer. So that first V, now that we've figured out which one it is, you're going to take your yarn needle and you're going to go into it from front to back. Okay, you know how we went under both legs of it? Go under both legs from front to back, and you can go ahead and pull your yarn through. Now you don't want to pull it completely tight, you want to leave a little bit of yarn that is about the same length as all of your other bind off stitches, because remember, we're trying to mimic the bind off stitch. If it's too tight, you just pull it out a little bit and you can correct that tension. Okay, so that looks about the same as all the other ones to me. So now you look at your last bound off stitch, which I have here. This is the yarn that we just created. So this is our last bound off stitch here. Okay, you see both legs of it. It's a little bit tiny from being pulled a little bit too tight, but you can kind of see how it has two legs here. So we're actually going to go into the middle. We're going to go down in the middle of it. Okay, so from top to bottom, kind of go down into it and stick out the back side. You are essentially picking up the back loop of it. Okay, if it helps you to think about it, it's like picking up the back loop of it. To go down through it and pull your yarn through. So you should have just created a fake stitch in between them right here. And it looks exactly the same from this perspective as all the others. So now all you need to do is weave in your ends on the wrong side of your work and it should be nearly invisible. So there's a little bit of like a loose stitch here that can tend to happen, that's okay, but you see how we fixed that divot? It no longer has that dip in the bind off. We can go ahead and weave in our ends and it should be invisible. So I'll go ahead and show you how to weave in your ends here, but there's no one right way to do this. You can do it however you like. The only advice that I really have is to make sure that you don't go just straight horizontal or straight vertical. Go a little bit diagonally because it will be harder for it to unravel if you do it that way. But like I said, there's no one right way to do this. Every time I do it, it's slightly different. So I'm going to kind of go diagonally this way. So I just take my yarn needle and I'm just going to go around a couple of these stitches, being careful not to undo any work I've done before. I want to keep going diagonal, right? So I'm going to go over one column, go around that stitch there. I really like to hide my yarn in purl stitches. So here I've singled out a purl stitch. You can kind of see I've paused and highlighted which direction I'm going here. So I'm just basically going to be following one strand of yarn. So I'm just going to kind of mimic what it does. So I pull it up through here because I'm following that stitch, right? And then up through this loop here because we're trying to go around this loop and basically duplicate it because it hides it better if you do the exact same thing. Okay, so see how I created the same shape that the stitch already was. So then I move a little bit over to the right because I want to do it one more time above that stitch I just did to really secure it. So we're going to do the same thing we just did and follow this strand here. Okay, so go through this loop and then we have to go around the bigger loop here to create kind of an upside down U. I'm pretty much done, so I'm just going to go down through a couple stitches I've already worked, but I'm going to split them. So each piece of yarn has a few plies or smaller strands that are twisted up to create one thread. So I'm just going to split them in half and go down through them. And now I'm just going to take my work and kind of pull it in a bunch of different directions so that the yarn I just wove in settles in and fits in really well. And that way, if it gets pulled, you know, as I'm putting this cowl on later, it will look really natural. So then you can go ahead and cut your yarn really close to your work, and there you have it. You can see a tiny little piece of yarn left over, but eventually it'll kind of work its way through your work and will be completely invisible. So here's my bind off edge, and it might look like it's rippling a little bit and it looks wonky, but remember, we haven't blocked our work yet. So it will definitely look a little bit sloppy and uneven until you block it. And especially because this is a ribbed cowl, once I pull my cowl out, the bind off edge doesn't ripple anymore. It looks fairly natural. It could use a little bit of evening out in my blocking process, but other than that, it looks perfect. It has enough stretch in it that when I pull it over my head to wear, it's not going to get stuck and it's going to work out really well. So you're going to go ahead and weave in your cast on tail end very similarly to how we did our bind off edge. You can go ahead and wash and block your cowl the same way that you blocked your swatch. So for me, I soaked my swatch and I'm going to do the same thing for this cowl, and then I'm going to kind of pin it out on blocking mats to be the same size as the measurements in my pattern. So there you have it. that is how you work the Cascades cowl. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more. I will have more free patterns for you guys in the future. If you want this in a printable PDF, you can find it for really cheap in my Etsy shop. I will link that below. Thanks so much for watching.